Hello, Jacob. It's a pleasure to be with you again today and interview you about your new book. In our last interview, we discussed your near-death experience in the book Life After Breath. And today we'll be discussing your newest book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. But before we delve into it, can you please just briefly recap on your NDE?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you, Matthew, for having me back on, as a guest. I love what you do, love what you're about, love your vision and your work. So again, thank you. For those of you who aren't familiar with my NDE story, I had an NDE at just 3 years old in September of 1993. I suffocated as a result of pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, when I went to a playground and climbed a ladder onto a slide, and all of my breathing was taken from me and obstructed, and I was suffocated in those moments. From losing my own breath, I was able to let go of this period of suffocation and just surrender to the breath of eternity, and had an experience of crossing over to the other side. That I was had a what I call like a reunion with all that was inside of me at all times, but I was made immediate into my awareness. And so my blinders of the human part were removed, and I was able to see things a lot broader on the spectrum of what was always inside of me and inside of all of us. And I was able to see my own spirit guides, angels, had awareness of past life memories. I had an understanding of the center point of all of creation, which there's many different spiritual and religious terminology for it, but in the closest convenience, it could be the universe or God, and awareness of self, family members, soul family members, what I would be doing in this lifetime, awareness of, my own premonitions that I saw that are happening to this day. So it was a completely profound experience that just, again, it was just returning home to what was always inside of me, and opening up that doorway of awareness and getting out of this box of the limitations of, that can happen with the human experience at times.
So you mentioned uh, opening up to what's really inside of you. And I know you talk in your book about our true identity and this world is an illusion. Could you share with us some of your thoughts on our true nature or identity and what you learned about that?
Yeah. Well, I think things are real in the moment, but in the macro reality, what we attach ourselves to, is just kind of like fleeting circumstances, that are temporary, that do not last. For instance, if you take who we are at our core and take away all of our titles, all of our jobs, all of our houses, and what are we left with? And that's something that people have to contemplate at a certain point in their life. Like, who are we really? Not what are we, not what are we, but what's our inner being? So much of identity is formulated by what we are doing, and the construct of the ego, and all these things that make up this box of self-belief and the nature of reality. But what happens when all those things leave us, and what are we left with? And the NDE was a doorway of recollection that who we are is infinite love connected to our infinite loving creator. And we're here for a short while, just as visitors, here having this experience for our own subjective, needs and our own subjective experiences. But there's, objectivity to it, in the sense that we are all come from the same place, go from the same place. We're here to hopefully be a grander expression of who we truly are. And the more that we remember who we are, and the more that we forget about what we've been taught we are, the more we can really be in unison with our inner being.
Really like what you're saying about dropping these labels about what we do in this world and what we've been trained to believe that we are, and coming back to that essence that came from in our spirit. Um, so you talk a lot in your book about your work as a social worker and as a therapist. understand it's somewhat of a family tradition. Can you share with us how the knowledge you gained from your NDE and your other spiritual experiences and learning has informed your practice?
No. Well, I think a lot of people focus on the euphoric elements of NDEs, and that's certainly a part of it. But what people don't understand is also the difficulties that they could contribute to. I think NDEs for a lot are a beautiful experience that the experiencer would never trade away, but that comes with a lot of difficulties. And for me, certainly the trauma that I had of suffocation and just going from this realm one day all of a sudden to that realm and then coming back here was difficult to wrap my head around. And I just, wasn't able to just put my head down and be on this conveyor belt of conditioning. I was able to really, in a way, see through it. And that led to a lot of defiance. I think when you're able to kind of see through things, it's hard for you to just blindly follow without questioning. And growing up, you're not really taught to question. You're taught to regurgitate. You're taught to memorize all this stuff, and just organic, creative thought is not encouraged. Regurgitation is something that is emphasized, not so much imagination. If you're imagining, they'll put you on, medication for ADHD or ADD or whatever. We want everyone to be able to comply, and so I think a lot of people, they are conditioned to self-abandon, and they're conditioned to not listen to themselves, but to listen to external sources. And people will follow that trajectory with how they view God and the nature of reality, and they'll so turn outward instead of inward. And, the near-death experience just reminded me of the value of turning inward and how we all have a masterpiece within every one of us, and we're able to really change our positionality in life. We could live from a more significant gear. And that really inspired me as a mental health therapist to really allow people to take empowerment to that voice, when largely for a lot of people in their own upbringings or familial structures or cultural upbringings, they were just kind of taught to be meek or meager and not really empowered. And I think the one of the greatest gains, hopefully from therapeutic involvement or intervention, is being empowered, really figuring out who you are, finding your own voice and direction in life. Because if you really don't know who you are, you could be virtually anybody. And if you don't know where you're going, you could be virtually anywhere. So having a sense of direction and inner awareness will allow people to accelerate their lives into new gears.
Thank you. So I know you also work with people through mindfulness meditation, and as helping them to be aware of this inner self you're describing. Could you talk a little bit about the benefits of mindfulness meditation in your work, and how it can help with the various challenges in our lives?
Yeah. Well, I think really a lot of it is, it's such a powerful tool in our times because we're faced with so much, especially now with all tools of, social media and our phones. We're just kind of flooded, with stuff coming our way. And so how do we have a life when all this is coming to us? And, mindfulness really allows people to live from a different gear, where we're having more of a space with, the external stimuli, and we're able to respond more. We're able to, instead to react to everything, we're able to have a response. And I think a lot of people are very disconnected from themselves. And so the world that they're living in has created their state of consciousness, their state of mind, versus their state of consciousness, their state of mind creating their world. And, mindfulness really allows people to deepen the connectivity, to the inner self, and their true connection to nature and reality. And once you taste that, once you connect to that, there's no turning back. You can't look at yourself the same way. And so, for instance, when you're, getting too conditioned in the human stuff, you could kind of pivot into the spiritual stuff. Or if you're too out there spiritually, sometimes we need that to uplift ourselves, but we could find a way to find a balance. So mindfulness is really intelligent in a sense that it allows people to understand the middle ground and to pivot to create more balance if they're two in one way for a bit of time and two in the other way for a bit of time. I think we're here to be hybrids of having both realities coexist.
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed your discussion about that, both in the Life After Breath and the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Having how you were describing moving between this kind of the spirit realm and this realm, and trying to gain balance in your life, and that's definitely can be challenging. But I actually I've had a lot of benefits with mindfulness meditation myself. And just taking just little moments. I don't even necessarily spend much time on it, just maybe even 30 seconds, even 1 minute, just to be still and try to sense the true nature underneath. And I find that it can it can make an enormous difference in my ability to work in this world, and at jobs or focus, and not have unnecessary stress,
Mm,
and just be able to carry with me a certain level of peace and just alertness.
well,
And
I think we all have a divine spark within, but that gets covered, throughout our lifetimes many times. And mindfulness is just kind of like shining, all that stuff off, all that extra stuff that we don't need to allow ourselves, to really shine our inner light. That's what it's all about. Because if we are to be spiritual beings having this human experience, we need to have both, right? And so for us to connect to that spiritual being, we need an inner practice. We need another recharge. And so once you understand that you're beyond the body, you'll start to take it as a great responsibility, as with more power, more responsibility. So if we're hungry, we'll understand, okay, I need to feed my body. But if my soul is depleted, you'll be able to say, all right, how do I find equilibrium? How do I find a way, to really meet my own inner needs? And so with awareness, we could be aware of our own needs, what it's helpful for us, what's skillful for us, and what may not be, in our path. And it's always about awareness and ability to pivot, reset, and to really stay on, a higher road. Uh,
yeah, like what you're saying about resetting and kind of not just nourishing the body, nourishing the spirit.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
I
mean, how
like that
many
a lot.
people are more concerned with the batteries on their cell phones than their soul phones, right?
Yeah,
Like they call
soul
them,
phone.
right. So
Yeah,
you gotta,
yeah,
the consciousness that we're around is kind of like our Wi-Fi, right? And so we're connected to that. Where is it? Where could you point to it? It's all around us. So you just have to kind of connect. And when you're able to do that, you're kind of like a solar being. You think of solar panels and able to regenerate your own energy. So I think a lot of people, they don't know how to recharge. They don't know how to connect to that grid. We have to be more like a solar being and just connecting to this inner light, and the beauty inside of us and higher consciousness, and that could allow us to propel, in a better way throughout life.
yeah. I especially like your cell phone analogy because I've always had the analogy that when you wake up in the morning, you call God, and at the end of the day, you hang up, or maybe you don't. You just into your dreams. You invite him into your dreams. And so I like the idea of staying connected to the signal, to God or source, or your inner spirit, however you want to describe it. Um, and keeping that connection going, like it's like you're continually on the phone,
Mhm.
and your signal is still on. So I really like that.
There's a
Um,
big saying, that once we know our why, we'll be able to determine our how. So, like, why are we here? Why are we alive? What is this all about? And if we're able to have a strong foundation that's congruent with truth, that we are infinite spiritual beings here temporarily having this human experience, that will allow us to overcome, things a lot easier. We'll be able to have a clearer path of how we will get through it. But life is certainly a marathon, not a sprint. So requires a great bedrock of faith, determination, stamina, zest, passion, most importantly, enthusiasm. Look at the word enthusiasm. It's comprised of the Greek word entheos, which just means the God within. So when we're living with joy, we're connecting to our inner being or inner God.
I
We
like
have to
that.
find things that we like to do that bring us joy.
Yeah. That reminds me of something else in your book. Now I'm trying to remember. It was about the the summers of life. I think you described it, but it was like your
It
inner
was like
summer.
I think it was like an Albert Camus quote, I believe. But within the dead of winter, I found with me in a summer, and it is good, something like that. And then it's a
Yeah.
lot more elaborated than that. But essentially, um, oftentimes people who transform find it within some degree of existential crisis, and once they're able to go to that point, they'll be able to really see a beauty within all things, even the most difficult moments. And having an NDE that was, before I crossed over, it was the ultimate winter. It was just total depletion, trauma, suffocation, incredibly frightening experience. But from going towards that, you just kind of recognize that all those things are temporary in their nature, and many times that's a point to kind of lead you to your greater truth and to understand what is real and what's a temporary experience, that in its nature comes back to the nothingness of which it came from. you know
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I know in your book you talk about you work helping people through grief
right.
and how your NDEs helped you with that. Could you can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, no, I think if we're able to incorporate belief with grief, that could help. um I think two things could be true at the same time. You could be deeply spiritual, deeply aware, but also depressed, angry, out of sorts, confused when someone passes away. So, no matter how spiritual we are, we still have our raw human emotions, and both two things could be true at the same time. But having a sense of higher awareness will help us generate the hope and the faith past some of our pain that we go through. But it's all a process. Grief is kind of like a river where if you kind of surrender to it, it will take you to where you need to go. And you'd be able to have transformation from incredible pain and trauma and shock, and all of the different stages that people go through within the 5 or now 6 stages of grief, to finding maybe meaning or transformation from it. But having an awareness that our loved ones aren't totally under the ground, 6 feet under, or in a place of nothingness will help us understand, because it's not so much is there life after death, or for them, but are we ourselves able to find life after their death? That's a bigger question. So the life after death thing, we kind of know. And so I think for us it's about having the licensure and the ability to find a life after their death. That's the biggest position that people find themselves in. But having an awareness and that connectivity, that loved one and us could still in our own way have a new connection, that death doesn't mean the stop of that connection, could help. Even if it's a feeling of imaginative, we're for having dialogue or having conversation, there's continual life and continual growth of that relationship.
Let me ask you if you can focus for a few minutes on what your NDE showed you about our existence before this life.
Well, it was certainly a reminder that this isn't all that there is. And you know, it's a reminder that we're all spiritual in our nature. We're all infinite beings having this human experience. Um, and we have to remember that we don't come from here, we're experiencing this reality, but this is just a temporary experience of the soul. But there's a higher intelligence, a higher purpose for all that we go through. And we're not just experiencing this in soul fashion. There's so much more inside of us surrounding us on this journey, from our own spiritual guides to angels to God. So life is very much spiritual. The key is to remember that when we're here and to be connected to that, because otherwise it could be too human. And then sadly, we are enslaved by the human experience versus informed by it. and we could feel victim to situations instead of understanding that each thing that we experience has the ability to be transcendent, to be transformative. And so it really allows us, if we're able to understand that there's more to this, that we are the authors of our own stories in many ways, that we could write our own stories through our own approaches to things and finding growth and meaning past even, especially even the most difficult things, but also to really allow us to not be too attached to anything here, that we're all just experiencing these things, but these things are all temporary in their nature. The only thing that lasts is the relationships, the love that we have, and the change that we contribute to, here. All other things, fade. It's not to say that we should be depleted of these things, but these are means to an end. These are vehicles, but not to be attached to them. So do enjoy, have all these things, but understanding what is real at the end and what is just an experience is significant. But I think that the fact that we come from a higher intelligence, that this life is not random, that there's a much bigger picture at hand, that we come from in this life, before this life, and we're not just here dropped off day one being born, and that's all that there is. There's so much more that comes from before this life, after this life, and we have to find ways to utilize that to generate more in this life.
What you're describing is, I've always heard as termed having an eternal perspective. You don't just look
Eternal
at this
mind,
life.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We call it cosmic mind, eternal mind, but I think a lot of people get too micro-focused. And I think it's in balance. It's important to have a balance of the macro and the micro. Or in therapy, we call it, the logical mind versus the wise mind and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So it's finding ways to acknowledge both, but to find balance, with the emotional mind, with the logical mind, and where they meet halfway is usually the wise mind, you know.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I really appreciate all the insights you shared with us. Do you have any parting thoughts before we finished for today?
There are many, but first and foremost is people could go to an evidential medium, and get readings, which is great. You're hearing, messages from your loved ones from a complete stranger who doesn't know you, who could tell you specific details, and hopefully that will enrich, others' case or belief in knowing of eternity. But then it's another thing to have someone physically in front of you who's crossed over and been there. And so I think it's important for people to really build cases of evidence that make sense to them, to have their own judgment of what makes sense and leave the rest behind, but to listen to more of these NDE encounters, because we are the living embodiments of eternity. And we go through what we go through, not just for us, but for other people, to be a gentle tap on your shoulder to say, hey, you are much more than you could ever imagine. You are an infinite spiritual being. And to remind yourself that everyone has a purpose. We're all here divinely guided. We all have a divine purpose, and connect to that. So purpose just isn't in, best-selling authors or gurus or teachers or guides. Those are just mirrors of what we already know. And when we see greatness, we have to remind ourselves that that's me. That's who I am. That's my higher self. And we see things that we like, that give us joy. That's our inner being, really connecting to those points. So each of us has a beautiful divine spark within, an eternal divine spark within. And so we don't have to wait until we die to really access that spark. We could really, live that in this human embodiment. And that way we don't have to strive to go to heaven. We embody it. We are it. We don't have to wait for it. We're always connected to it while over here, and then we go over there. We're always there. So it's not a destination, but a place within. It's a connection.
Appreciate all the great insights you shared with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if anyone is interested, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder is available on Amazon through both paperback and Kindle, as well as my first book, Life After Breath, as well. And anyone has any questions, they could contact me through my website at jacoblcooper.com.